Story 1. The events of this story happened when I was 21, during my last year of college. I'm 34 now and still haunted by terrifying flashbacks from that Halloween. My friends and I loved to party in college, and Halloween was one of the best nights to do so. We got to dress up in sexy and not so sexy outfits, and it was an excuse to let loose. My friends were all beautiful and boys were always drooling over them. I was never considered one of the hot girls, but I didn't care. I cherished my friendships with both boys and girls. That Halloween, we had a party at my friend Steve's house. It was like many college parties where we were all just big kids, and some still couldn't handle their alcohol. Around 11 YJS, the cops were called due to a noise complaint, and we all scattered, just like we did in high school. My friend Amy told me to hop into a car with her friend Dave, and I, unfortunately, agreed. The car ride was uncomfortable. It was just Dave and me, and he didn't talk much. The car smelled like beef jerky with a hint of body odor. He had a mask on his lap while driving, a hooded sweatshirt, jeans, and brown work boots. He had a scraggly beard and greasy hair. I tried to make conversation, but he didn't really respond. Finally, I asked him which school he went to, and he replied, "I dropped out of college a while ago." This made me a bit uneasy because, at 21, I was still in college, and he was 37, hanging out with a bunch of college kids. Trying not to show my nerves, I asked his age, and he nervously answered, 37. This startled me because he was slightly older than me, and I was feeling uneasy about the situation. Hoping to ease the tension, I asked how he knew Amy. His answer terrified me. In a shaky voice, he said, "Who's Amy?" I sank into my seat, not knowing how to react. "She's the blonde who told me to get in the car with you," I replied. He nonchalantly said, "Oh, her. Yeah, she told me you were single." I didn't know what to say. I was furious with Amy, scared of Dave, and lost in the pitch-black night. After a seemingly endless 10-15-minute drive, we arrived at a rundown house in a not-so-nice part of town. All the houses on the block looked abandoned or beat up. I strained my eyes, but it was too dark to recognize any cars. Dave entered the house without knocking. The place was cold and smelled worse than his car. It had a dirty olive-green shag carpet, an old brown couch, and white walls with crude paint everywhere. Piles of pizza boxes and beer cans cluttered the floor, but they were old, not recent remnants of a party. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the floor. A man and a woman sat close but unmoving on the brown couch, seemingly passed out. We ventured into the kitchen, which was just as filthy and reeked of garbage. There were two men in there. One, in his 20s or 30s, seemed disturbed. The other, an older gentleman in his 40s or 50s, remained silent, staring at me. Feeling sick, I hesitated, but I had no idea where I was or if these people posed any danger. We moved to a back room, a screened-in porch. Relief washed over me as I saw about 6 or 7 people, including 2 girls, albeit half-naked and painfully thin. They all stared at me, but the crowd made me feel somewhat safe. However, that sense of security vanished when the 2 girls left with the guys, all heading upstairs and shutting the door. I shuddered at the thought of what might be happening. Dave finally spoke up, saying, "I think you're really cute." I thanked him, trying to dismiss it. He got up, began rubbing my back, and started heavy breathing. This was behavior I wasn't accustomed to. After an unpleasant back rub for about 5 minutes, he stood right in front of me, uncomfortably close. I stammered, "I'm not that kind of girl." His response, "I don't know about that," sent shivers down my spine. Tears welled up, but then a girl from upstairs began screaming and cursing everyone in the room. Dave, inches from my face, rushed upstairs, leaving me alone in the back room. Without hesitation, I climbed out of the window and ran, not knowing where I was headed. I ran down the street, staying close to the sidewalk, desperate to avoid drawing attention. I couldn't tell how much time had passed without my phone, but eventually, I reached a 24-hour Walmart. Inside, I had the night manager call my parents, who picked me up from a small downtown area about 30 minutes from my house. What terrified me the most was seeing Dave and his friend Skip walk into that Walmart while I waited for my dad. They didn't notice me, but I couldn't believe they were there. They seemed to be searching for something, maybe me. The next day, Amy apologized profusely, and I forgave her. but I couldn't shake the trauma of that night. Even now, over 10 years later, I'm still haunted by those memories. I know it could have been much worse, and I'm grateful I left without physical harm. However, I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. I've never seen Dave, Skip, or any of those people again. I urge you to be cautious if you decide to go out this Halloween. Always know where your friends are because you might end up somewhere you don't want to be, and you might not be as lucky as I was. Story 2. Let me begin by acknowledging that in my mid-20s, I was a dirtbag. I was a single man doing whatever I wanted. Looking back, I cringe at the memories of that time. I did many terrible things, hurt people, and was simply a piece of garbage. There were moments when life served me a hefty dose of humility, whether it was the cops arresting me or getting knocked out due to overestimating my abilities. However, one late October night, I experienced the most significant serving of that humility. I've always hated Halloween. As a kid, I went trick-or-treating with my friends without a costume, and I'd get angry at people who refused to give me candy because of it. This disdain for Halloween continued into my adult years. I would date girls who loved dressing up, but I refused to participate. I even avoided Halloween parties because I just didn't get it. One year, though, I had a change of heart, not because I suddenly liked Halloween, but because I met a girl named Bree. I met her casually at a bar on a random Tuesday night in October. We got to talking, and of course, her love for Halloween came up. She could see my disgust, and I shared stories of why I loathed Halloween. Bree seemed to understand, but then, in a seductive voice, said, "I really think you need to reconsider." I laughed condescendingly, but she gestured to 3 other girls in the corner of the bar, all my type. Bree introduced them as her friends, and they waved back. Confused, I tried to piece things together. Bree continued seductively, "Those are my girls. We're going to a Halloween party in the middle of the woods, and none of us have dates. You should be our date tonight." I couldn't resist such an implication. I was ignorant and saw it as a chance to spend the evening with 4 beautiful women. I had fun on my mind. That night, I followed my car with Bree and one of the other girls. The other 2 drove separately. I was instructed to follow the lead car since this was before GPS. We drove for a while, long enough for doubts to creep in. But every time I hesitated, Bree would distract me and the doubts vanished. Finally, both cars pulled over in complete darkness. 2 of the girls took out flashlights and signaled for me to follow them. We followed a hidden path into the dense woods. As we walked, I strained to hear any sounds of a party, but there was only silence. Suddenly, the girls in front began to sprint. Bree held me back, guiding me toward a tree. It was so dark that I could barely see, only the faint moonlight revealing Bree's face. I thought she was going to kiss me, but instead she struck my head with a flashlight. I instinctively covered my head as another blow hit me. Down on my knees in pain, I realized Bree had a purse and she had been discreetly holding it. She struck me with it while the other girls approached. Instead of helping me, they joined in, beating me with their flashlights and adding high-heeled kicks to the ribs. They took my wallet and my cell phone, although I was broke, and my phone was a cheap flip phone. If I had it, I could have called the police. After grabbing my wallet, they kicked me a few more times before running back the way they came. I even heard their car drive away. I lay in the dirt, hurt and in shock for a while. Eventually, I got up and stumbled back to my car. It felt like a truck had run me over. They couldn't find my keys, but they had smashed my windshield and passenger side door. I was in agony, but I managed to drive until I found a 24-hour gas station and had the attendant call the police. I gave the police the names and descriptions of the women, but they were never found. Clearly, Bree wasn't her real name. Throughout that night, I never even noticed what type of car they were driving or its color. It wasn't long after that incident that I started making significant changes in my life. I'm lucky I escaped with just a few broken ribs, and sometimes it still freaks me out when I think about those girls, realizing they're probably still out there. Even in my late 30s, I still can't stand the Halloween season. Story 3. This happened to me a few years ago on Halloween. My siblings and I were giving out candy for trick-or-treating, and we had planned to scare some kids with our costumes. We set up a creepy display and everything was going well. We scared a few kids and handed out candy as we had planned. As the evening progressed, our neighbors, who were also giving out candy, eventually went back into their houses around 11 p.m. because it was getting late. At around 11:30 p.m., we noticed a man in the middle of the road about 80 feet away from us, just staring in our direction. We shrugged it off, thinking he was just trying to scare us. About 15 minutes passed and the man was still there. He suddenly walked towards us, holding out his candy bucket and said, "Trick or treat." We started to feel nervous, but we gave him some candy. The man then returned to his previous spot and continued to stare at us. We decided it would be better to go back inside, creeped out by this guy. We all stayed up late, playing video games and eating snacks. Later, I got up to go to the kitchen for more snacks, and I got curious about the man. I was convinced he wouldn't be there, so I checked the window to see if he was still around. What I saw next still haunts me to this day. The same man was now in the driveway, wearing a leather face mask and waving at me when he spotted me. He put his index finger to his lips and whispered something while hiding something behind his back. I was so shocked that I couldn't scream, even though I wanted to. I quickly returned to my room and told my dad about it. My dad got up and went outside with a pistol, but couldn't find anything. He reassured me to go back to sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes the entire night. Around 3 a.m., I heard rustling outside my window and knew it was him. Too scared to check, I froze and tried to listen for any noises. Then I heard knocking at my window, and it sounded like he was trying to open it. Terrified, I reached for my phone, which was right next to me, and called my dad. I explained what was happening, and he went outside again. He told me there was nothing there. Eventually, the noises stopped, and I managed to fall asleep. I soon forgot about the incident, but when I brought it up a few weeks ago, my dad told me the real truth about what happened that night. He said that when he went outside the first time, he saw a man with an ugly mask who waved at him and walked away, carrying a basket of candy. The second time, my dad only found a note that said, "Trick or treat." I still don't know what that man's intentions were, and I can't help but wonder what might have happened if my dad hadn't gone out the first time with his pistol. The memory still creeps me out, and I'm unsure if the man was just being creepy or had other intentions in mind. Story 4. Every Halloween, they would have several weeks of festivities. These festivities included attractions such as the haunted hayride, the haunted house, and the haunted corn maze. In fact, now that I think about it, they added the word haunted to almost every attraction. I think the only things that weren't haunted were the bonfire and the hot dog stand. I'm a 22-year-old female with two 24-year-old close male friends I met in high school. I was moving away soon, and we wanted to spend as much time together as we could before I left. So, of course, we decided to go to the farm festivities together. It was pretty fun. I especially loved the haunted hayride because they had some pretty hunky actors. But the haunted house was a bit much for me. I hate small, enclosed areas and get freaked out quickly when a lot of things happen in a tiny place. I knocked over and nearly trampled my other friend several times. When we got outside to an open cornfield, I was relieved. While that part was the least scary to me, it might have been the part where I was in the most danger. Standing in front of us was a man dressed up in typical haunted house gear, a fake chainsaw prop, a pale white mask, and scraggly red-stained clothes. He began talking, and the first thing he said to me was, "Are these two your little fuck buddies?" I burst into laughter at the absurd thought of my two close friends and me involved in something like that. My friends joined in the laughter, but the man didn't laugh. He just kept talking. He started saying disturbing things, like how he was going to watch us, and then he would torture us after. He even suggested he might join in, going into explicit detail. My friends and I nervously laughed, feeling uncomfortable. We thought that if we stopped laughing, it wouldn't be a joke anymore. It would just be this weird older guy in a cheesy Halloween outfit talking about inappropriate things. Finally, he revved up his chainsaw prop and told us we had 10 seconds to run. He threatened to murder my two friends and assault me. In a panic, I burst into a jog through the cornstalks, my friends urging me to run. Confused and frustrated, I obliged and continued to run until we reached the next part of the haunted house. I asked my friends why they kept telling me to run, and they explained that the man had been right behind me the whole time. What made this whole thing seem more sinister was what happened while we made our way to my friend's car in the parking lot after enjoying the rest of the attractions. We came across a man hanging around, asking how we liked the fair. He seemed on edge about entering, which struck me as odd since the farm was about to close in half an hour. What stood out was as we said our goodbyes to the strange man, I felt his eyes scanning my body. He asked me how I liked the part in the haunted house in the cornfield. I'm sure that if this guy had really tried anything, he would have been in for a nasty surprise. As a teenager, I had received my black belt in a Korean martial art form focused on self-defense called Tang Soo, but I wonder if things would have been different for another girl that night. One with a smaller frame and a less assertive disposition, maybe not traveling with two tall guys. Story 5, title, Halloween Nightmare. This eerie incident occurred on Halloween night in 2015. My friends, Jack, Will, Lucas, Sarah, and I, had all made plans to go trick-or-treating together in Will's neighborhood. It's crucial to note that Will's neighborhood, while not the safest, was relatively manageable, aside from the occasional drug user and dealer. It was 8 p.m., and I was decked out in my Scream costume, complete with fake blood smeared all over the mask. My phone rang, and it was Will calling. "Dude, where are you? We're all waiting," Will exclaimed with Lucas, Jack, and Sarah alongside him. "I'm on my way," I replied. I dashed to Will's neighborhood and finally spotted them. Lucas was dressed as a clown, Sarah as Fiona from Shrek, and Will as Popeye from the Disney cartoon. We exchanged hugs and set off for a night of trick-or-treating. Everything was going smoothly as we went from door to door, shouting, "Trick or treat!" We finished visiting the last house, content with the candy haul. Since Will was already in his neighborhood, he left first. As we approached the gate of Will's neighborhood, Lucas suddenly pointed out a Toyota van slowly trailing us. We tried to rationalize why this van was following us, but deep down, we were all quietly terrified. To play it safe, we decided to quicken our pace, huddling together for security. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that someone was watching us, and my skin crawled with unease. The van abruptly sped up and pulled alongside us, its window rolling down to reveal a gaunt man with bloodshot eyes. His smile was eerie, and I couldn't help but notice his severely yellowed, decaying teeth. My internal alarm bells were ringing, and it became difficult to breathe as this stranger stared at us. We stared back in silence until he broke it with an unsettling offer. "You kids want some more candy?" Unfortunately, Sarah, who had a hard time saying no, replied, "Sure." Lucas and I exchanged alarmed glances as the man reached into his vehicle and handed each of us a bag. I reluctantly opened mine to find the usual candy assortment, Snickers, Twix, and the like. As we prepared to leave, he said something chilling, "Enjoy those candies, kids, they're extra good." With that, he drove off, leaving us shaken. A few minutes later, we were safely back home, but the creepy encounter continued to haunt us. It was now midnight, and exhaustion set in. As I emptied my candy bag on the floor, I noticed a bag from the stranger. A gut feeling told me to inspect it. I grabbed a fun-sized Snickers bar and split it in half, revealing a horrifying sight that would haunt me forever: a razor blade. Panicked, I called Sarah and Lucas, warning them about the candy from the stranger. The next day, I filed a police report, providing a detailed description of the man and his vehicle, and handed over the bag of candy. Sadly, the man was never apprehended. This nightmarish experience left me scarred, and I never went trick-or-treating again. To all you parents out there, please, please check your children's Halloween candy, for you never know what sick individuals may be lurking in the shadows. Story 6. This happened during my freshman year of college at a pretty large university. Over time, I met many people and formed a few groups of friends that I would often hang out with. When Halloween came around during my freshman year, I had plans to go out with some friends. I decided to dress up as a nerd, and we headed to a few bars around campus. As the night grew later, some of my friends wanted to go to a strict bar in town. Being only 19 at the time, I figured I wouldn't get in. So, I suggested they go ahead, and I reached out to some other friends on Snapchat to see what they were up to. One of my friends named John told me about a party he had been invited to. He said it was supposed to be a really big one and asked if I wanted to join him. It sounded perfect since I wasn't tired yet and still wanted to hang out with people. I agreed, and we met up at the edge of campus before walking a few blocks to the provided address. When we arrived, we saw what seemed to be the house. Faint music could be heard from inside, and there was a guy wearing a basketball jersey and sunglasses sitting on the porch, sipping a beer. We approached, and John greeted the guy who apparently knew him. Introductions were made, and the guy's name was Jake. We entered the house together, and the first thing we noticed was a small entryway filled with shoes. We removed our shoes and proceeded through another doorway into a room. There, we found a speaker, blaring music, but the room was empty. A sense of unease washed over me, and as I began to move toward the next room, I heard footsteps behind us. John and I turned around to find two imposing men entering the room, each wielding baseball bats and wearing ski masks that concealed their faces. They both towered over 6 feet tall. One of them menacingly threatened to hurt us unless we complied, and they ordered us to go into the next room, located at the back end of the house. Terror gripped me, and John appeared stunned and frightened as well. The next room revealed itself as the kitchen, with a small table and a chair, a stove, a sink, and the back door. A wooden door cracked open, leading to the basement where the two men ordered us to go. They stood about 6 feet behind us, bats in their right hands and their left hands pointing. As we reluctantly moved toward the door, John nudged me. Just as I looked at him, he bolted for the back kitchen door. In a split second, he managed to unlock and open it. Without thinking, I followed him and sprinted as fast as I could. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me as I ran. I could hear the men yelling and chasing us. I collided with John as we burst through the door, nearly tripping over him. As I was about to escape, I felt the back of my right leg struck, probably with a baseball bat. It hit my upper right calf, causing intense pain, but the adrenaline propelled me out of the door. I followed John around the side of the house, my leg throbbing, but we gradually distanced ourselves from the pursuing men. As we passed 2 garbage cans on the side of the house, I tipped one over in an attempt to slow them down. John shouted as he ran. By the time we reached the street, we no longer heard the men chasing us. I ran with John all the way back to campus, where exhaustion and the pain in my leg finally caught up with me. We immediately called the police, providing them with the address of the house. Unfortunately, when they arrived, nobody was there, and the house was vacant. It was owned by a guy who typically rented it to students. I'm convinced that John and I narrowly escaped a terrible fate that night. My leg remained sore for a few weeks, but otherwise, we were fine.